Dennis Calloway clocked out at 5:17 p.m. on a Thursday and walked to his car and got in and did not start the engine. He sat there for 43 minutes. He knew it was 43 minutes because he watched the clock on the dashboard, which showed 5:17 when he got in and 6:00 when he finally turned the key. He watched it the way you watch something when your mind has gone somewhere that the rest of you hasn't caught up to yet, but not blankly, not dramatically, just with the specific attention of a man who has run out of the particular energy required to do the next thing. The parking lot of Hargrove Distribution in Louisville, Kentucky, emptied around him. Cars pulled out one by one, the evening shift change bringing new vehicles in. The whole mechanical rhythm of a place that ran 24 hours and therefore never fully stopped. Dennis had worked at Hargrove for 27 years. He was 53 years old and had the title of Logistics Coordinator, which was a title that had been given to him 11 years ago when the position he had been doing for 16 years was renamed to reflect industry standards. Nothing about the work had changed. The title had changed. He had been told this was a promotion and had accepted this framing without quite believing it. He sat in his car and looked at the building and thought about 27 years. Not with anger, that was not the feeling. Something older and quieter than anger. The specific fatigue of a man who has been doing a thing for long enough that the thing and the man have become so entangled that he cannot easily say where one ends and the other begins, and who has begun to wonder, at 53, whether the thing he has become entangled with is actually the thing he would have chosen. He had never asked himself this question before, or he had asked it in the vague, peripheral way you ask questions you are not ready to answer, and then let them drift. Today it was not drifting. Today it was sitting in the passenger seat of his Nissan in the Hargrove Distribution parking lot asking to be taken seriously. He started the car at 6th gear and drove home. His wife Sandra was making dinner when he came in. She was a dental hygienist, had been for 22 years, and had come home an hour before him and was in the kitchen in the way she was always in the kitchen at this hour, which was efficiently and with the radio on low and with the particular competence of someone who has made dinner after work 5 days a week for enough years that it required no conscious effort. She heard him come in and said without turning, "Pasta tonight." 15 minutes. Dennis said, "Okay." He went upstairs and changed out of his work clothes and sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes in the way he had not sat on the edge of the bed since he couldn't remember. He sat and looked at the carpet and thought about nothing specific and everything general. Sandra called up that dinner was ready. They ate at the kitchen table, the way they had eaten at the kitchen table for 29 years of marriage and with the television off, which was a rule Sandra had established early and which Dennis had never disagreed with, and with conversation that was the specific conversation of two people whose lives are so familiar to each other that the territory of what needs to be said has narrowed over the decades to the genuinely new and the genuinely important, with everything else understood without saying. Dennis said, "I sat in the parking lot after work for almost an hour." Sandra looked at him. She set her fork down, which was something she did when she was giving full attention to something. "Why?" she said. "I don't know exactly," Dennis said. "I just couldn't make myself come home yet. Not because I didn't want to come home, just because the space between there and here felt like the only place that was mine for a minute." Sandra looked at him for a moment. She was not alarmed. Sandra did not alarm easily, which was one of the things Dennis valued most about her. She was paying attention. "How long has this been building?" she asked. Dennis thought about this honestly. "I think since March," he said. "Maybe longer. Since the Hendricks contract fell through?" He had not made this connection, but now that she made it, he recognized it. The Hendricks contract had been a major account that Dennis had worked on for 8 months, had done the logistics architecture for, had presented internally and externally, and which had ultimately gone to a competitor because a decision above Dennis's level had introduced a pricing structure that Dennis had flagged as problematic and which had been thanked and ignored. The account had gone. Nobody had mentioned Dennis's flag. The year had continued. "Maybe," he said. I think it was already there. Hendricks made it harder to not see. Sandra picked her fork back up. She ate a bite of pasta. Then she said, "What would you do if you could do something different?" Dennis had expected a different response, reassurance, or practical concern, or the kind of supportive reframing that was also, if you looked at it directly, a way of moving past the thing rather than staying in it. The question surprised him. "I don't know," he said. "Yes, you do," Sandra said. "You just haven't let yourself say it." He thought about what he would do for 3 weeks. Not constantly. He had a job and a life and the logistics of Hargrove. Distribution continued to require his attention, which he gave them with the same reliability he always had because Dennis Calloway did not know how to do his job poorly, regardless of how he felt about it. But in the margins, in the car on the way to work, in the parking lot after, which he now sat in for 10 minutes most evenings, not out of crisis but out of the habit of giving himself that specific space, he kept coming back to one thing: teaching. Not the obvious version. He had no education degree, no formal qualification for a classroom. But the thing that had most consistently lit something in him over 27 years at Hargrove was the training. When new employees came in, Dennis was the one who trained them on the logistics systems, on the rhythm of the floor, on how to read the flow of a warehouse the way experienced people read it, not by looking at individual elements but at the pattern they made together. He was told he was good at this. He believed he was good at this. More than good, he was the person the training had been waiting for in the way that some people are the right person for a specific thing without ever having formally claimed it, he told Sandra on a Sunday evening. She listened the whole way through. Then she said, "Vocational training programs. Community colleges. They hire people with industry experience for exactly this." "I know," Dennis said. "I looked." She looked at him. "You already looked." Jefferson Community College has a logistics and supply chain certificate program, Dennis said. They posted an adjunct position in September. I didn't apply. I didn't think I was, he paused. I didn't apply. Why not? Sandra said. Because it pays about a third of what I make at Hargrove, Dennis said. And because I've been at Hargrove for 27 years and the pension is 4 years away. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said. Those are real things. They're real things, Dennis agreed. They're also, Sandra said, not actually the question you're asking. Dennis looked at his wife across their kitchen table. 29 years, the woman who made dinner with the radio on low and set her fork down when something needed full attention. No, he said. They're not. He did not quit his job. He was 53 and had a mortgage with 4 years left and a daughter finishing her last year of college and a pension that was 4 years from vesting. And he was a practical man who understood that practicality was not the opposite of dreams, but sometimes the precondition for them. He called Jefferson Community College in February, asked about the adjunct position. Was it filled? Was there a similar opening? Was there any pathway for someone with his experience and without a teaching credential? The department coordinator, a woman named Valerie, said the position had been filled, but that they maintained a pool of industry professionals for guest lectures and workshop facilitation, and that the logistics program was always looking for people with warehouse and distribution experience who could speak to real-world application. Dennis said he was interested. Valerie said she'd send him information. He told Sandra that evening. She said that's a start. He gave his first guest lecture in April. 2 hours a Thursday evening, 18 students in a supply chain fundamentals course. Dennis stood at the front of a community college classroom for the first time in his life and talked about logistics the way he had learned to talk about it, not from textbooks, but from 27 years of watching things work and watching things fail and understanding the difference between the two. The students asked questions. Good ones. The kind that told him they were actually thinking rather than just taking notes. A young man in the third row named Marcus asked about the relationship between pricing, structure, and logistics design in ways that made Dennis think he might have a specific future in procurement. Dennis told him so specifically after class. Marcus said, "Nobody's ever told me that before." Dennis drove home and sat in his driveway for a few minutes. Not the same sitting as the Hargrove parking lot. Different quality. This was not the sitting of a man who had run out of energy for the next thing. This was the sitting of a man who had found something and needed a moment to be present with the finding. He went inside. Sandra was in the kitchen, radio low. "How was it?" she said. Dennis thought about the specific answer. About Marcus in the third row. About the 2 hours that had gone faster than any 2 hours he could remember from the last several years. About the way explaining something he understood deeply to people who needed to understand it had a quality of rightness that was different from the quality of rightness of doing something well out of competence and habit. "It was the best 2 hours I've had at work in a long time," he said. Sandra turned from the stove and looked at him. She smiled. Not the smile of someone relieved. The smile of someone who had known something was going to happen and is watching it happen. "Dinner in 10, she said. Dennis sat at the kitchen table and thought about 4 years. About a pension and a mortgage and a daughter in her last year of college and a teaching credential program at Jefferson that ran 18 months and accepted students with professional experience. 4 years was not forever. It was enough time to build towards something. He was still sitting in parking lots. Just different ones now for different reasons. That, he thought, was progress. That was exactly what progress looked like from the inside.